You see the same thing often, say, between parents and children, where the mother or the father are afraid that the child will surpass them in some way or leave them. And that's the Freudian Oedipal situation. If either parent is afraid that the child will leave, then the parents will do everything they can to undermine every movement whatsoever towards the child's independence and keep them infantile. And the infantilized child becomes dependent but unbelievably resentful, as they should, because the parent is doing everything they can unconsciously to ensure that the best part of the child is never allowed to develop. And that's an unbelievably common occurrence. Freud believed that was characteristic of most families, and that was partly because of the long developmental period that children need in order to become independent. But more complexly, it was because the dynamics between the father and the mother may be impaired in one fashion or another, sexually or from a perspective of communication, or in any of the ways that people can be mismatched, and maybe as well the couple's isolated, somewhat friendless, and so there are many things that they need to be accruing to themselves in order for their lives to be full, and they're not getting them, and so then they turn to their children for more attention than they should, for example, and encourage their children to pay more attention to them than they should. And then from the Freudian perspective, what happens is that the whole unconscious dynamic and fantasy structure of the household becomes extremely pathologized, so that what people are acting out, so to speak, is this weird intermingling of mother, father, child, and lover, where none of the roles are clearly, and parent, where none of the roles are clearly distinguished from one another. It's a mess. You know, and that's a situation that's very much facilitated by deceit on the part of the parents, because maybe the husband asks the wife, "Well, are you happy, dear?" And she says, "Well, of course, everything's always going well in our household." And what she means is, "I'd like to take out a knife and stab you 15 times while you're asleep," but she doesn't regard that as an appropriate verbal statement, even though it might be something that she's fantasizing about deeply, you know, for hours a day. But there's no way that's going to come to light. You know, you can see these sorts of things happening if you pay attention to your fantasy life from a Freudian perspective, because you'll see, if you can catch flashes of fantasy, especially when you're frustrated or disappointed or annoyed or something hasn't gone your way, you'll have little stories branch off in your mind. And those are these underlying id-like systems that are trying to inform your behavior, but they're kind of one-sided and single-minded, and the fantasies that they pop up can be, you know, pathologically aggressive, or say pathologically sexual, but they're attempting to make a case for a mode of being that needs to be integrated into your personality. Now, the other thing the Freudians noted was, say, the less sexual you are as an integrated personality, the more sexuality will manifest itself as pathologized in your fantasy. It's partly because, in some sense, it has to scream very loudly to get your attention. But it's also because if you refuse to allow something that's alive, a healthy path of development, it's not just going to go away. If you put a potato in a cellar and you shine very dim light on it, all you get are these white, spindly shoots that are hideous and you know, and appalling. But the thing is trying to live. And the same thing applies from the Freudian perspective to the fundamental instinctual motivations that drive human beings. It's like they can be deeply pathologized to the degree that they're not allowed to be properly expressed. And then you can get more and more dissociated from them, so that it becomes an increasing war between fantasies that are developing more and more to the pathological side, and the ego, which is doing everything it can to increasingly defend itself from those realizations. So